This is Frisia continuing abusive marriage, temporary restraining order section, and I just wanted to show you. In fact, you will probably not be shocked, but I have two beautiful rabbits. The larger one lives outside in an enclosure, and the little brown one has to stay inside because of her arthritis. But she gets to eat grass every now and then. So let me continue quickly because I got cut off by my storage on my phone last time. And just to preface, I am not an attorney, so I'm not intending to give legal advice. I'm intending to tell you my story and just make some suggestions based on what I have been through and what worked for me. I'm also not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, so I do recommend that you get help professionally from any of those types of people if you feel like you're reaching your breaking point or you cannot achieve safety on your own. So, just a moment of levity when I told my ex that I wanted a divorce the first time, which was 3 years ago. He was extremely angry and insulted me over and over. One of the things he said is that I would die old and alone with my cats. And I thought that was so funny because I'm deathly allergic to cats. I've never had one. Except in childhood, she lived outside, but I do have rabbits. I've had 4 rabbits, so I don't know why I didn't say I'd die old and alone with my rabbits. But to get to a more serious subject, why you might seek a restraining order in the first place, I was subjected to numerous what I would call veiled death threats you will die this way. You will be buried deep underground when such and such happens. I mean, it was really frightening, and that's the type of thing that I was recommending you could record in a journal, which might be helpful later on if it shows an escalating pattern of verbal abuse. Another thing that happened to me that really signaled the end was that about 3 years ago, again, my ex began with a name-calling campaign. I'm in my 50s, and I was brought up during a time of civility, and he started calling me the B word on vacation in another country. And after he did this and said I was acting like I was crying. I was hysterically crying. I was extremely sad. I didn't know what he was doing this for. And he then left me alone in a hotel room 6,000 miles from home and took our kids to an exhibit for which they had tickets. And just left me there, didn't text me or call me. Finally, one of my kids got in touch and said, "Mom, can you please come and have lunch with us?" And this had happened, similar incident happened a few years before when we were on a train between cities also again, overseas, where I didn't speak the language, they didn't speak the language, and I had left some allergy medicine out for our oldest child to take the night before in his room. They were staying in an adjoining room, and he was about 14 or 15, and he had just terrible, terrible allergies and was waking up. So I left out some allergy medicine for him, over the counter, etc. And as I have said, I'm a healthcare professional, and my ex has absolutely no experience at all in this field and claims that, he has an economics and business degree, etc. Partially true, but anyhow, we were on this train, the 4 of us, going towards a major city in Europe, and we're all very excited, and I said to my son, "Hey, did you take the allergy pill I left for you so you could get a better night's sleep?" And my ex just exploded in front of my kids and said, "I don't want you drugging our children. That is completely inappropriate. How dare you?" Right in front of them. And there were, 50 passengers in the same train car. I was stupefied. So 10 minutes later, we pulled into the station, and I just said, "Look, guys, I need to be alone. That is not okay that you speak to me that way." And I walked off. We had working cell phones and so on, but I went and toured the city alone. If I could have figured out a way to take my kids with me without causing a huge scene and more what I would call narcissistic rage, I would have done it, but I just couldn't, and yet I could not be with him. I mean, he was so destructive. So he also was destructive to my relationship with my kids, which I'm sure many of you have experienced. Back to the topic of how to protect yourself from a toxic person, such as a narcissist, sociopath, or just an abuser of any type in the U.S. I know there must be other ways in other countries, but I wanted to mention that another method I eventually had to resort to was calling the police to come to my own home and speak with this person. For example, the day that I mentioned before where he said he was going to, quote, lock me out of the house, lock me out of our bank accounts, etc., unquote, is because, and this happened because I had written a check to a landlord after serving him with divorce papers and telling him that I needed to move out so that we could begin to share custody in an equitable manner, and he needed to do the same, and we would both spend time with our daughter. The son had left for college. Anyhow, he said all these things over the phone, and I said, look, I'm at work. I am working very hard, and my patients need me. I can't leave. And I said, you could make me lose my job. And his response, I will never forget this. He said, I know. So at that point, he had texted and called me a dozen times, and I decided I was going to seek a civil standby, which I had learned about in a domestic violence support group. A civil standby, at least in California, means that you call your local police force. I don't think I called 911. I think I got the number for the local sheriff's department. And I explained the situation, to the dispatcher, and I said, I need someone to meet me at my home because my husband is being irrational and threatening me with these actions, which are illegal. And she said, no problem. So I had this sheriff meet me at the town hall near my home. I left work, and this whole process took about 2 hours. I mean, it was just one of the most difficult days of my life. So I met with the sheriff, and he was understanding. So then we drove together. I followed him in his squad car to my house about 5 minutes away. And the fascinating thing was, as I pulled up, I saw my father-in-law's car in the driveway. And he drives a late model, meticulously maintained European car. So it's recognizable. And I had been expecting to find my ex at home. He had been unemployed for over 5 years. So generally he would sit around in his pajamas or, something resembling underwear and ratty t-shirts for most of the day. Our kids would leave for school, or our daughter would leave for school. She drove, so he didn't need to take her anywhere. And he would just sit there tapping on his laptop, watching YouTube videos and God knows what else for hours. So I got to the house. Again, I saw my father-in-law's car, and I thought, oh no, he's called in the reinforcements. He knows that I'm going to be confronting him, whatever. I just walked into the house, went down the hall, and there was my ex sitting at his desk in his spacious office, which he had no use for as he didn't have a job, holding court, fully dressed to the nines, down to his wingtip shoes, button-down shirt, laughing and chatting with his father. And I said, excuse me, but we just had a very disturbing conversation, and I felt that I needed to talk to you, and I've brought Sheriff so-and-so with me. And his father looked startled. Obviously, he had no idea this had happened. And he sat there as if he was going to wait it out, as if he had a seat at the show. So I politely asked my father-in-law to please leave, which he did. And I made sure his car left the driveway. And then I said to my ex, look, the things you said to me are illegal. You cannot lock me out of my own home. You cannot change the passwords on our joint bank accounts. And, that sort of behavior is unacceptable. And I've brought this sheriff here to reinforce what I'm telling you. And he smiled and laughed, ha, ha, ha. And he said, well, Sheriff, none of that happened. I don't know what she's talking about. I would never say such a thing. And I have been subjected to his gaslighting, which is basically lying, for years and years. And I said, Sheriff, I would not have called you here if this was not true. I had to leave work and it's really, I do not do this very often. This is a really critical situation, and I needed your help to explain my rights. So the sheriff, I think he realized, yeah, something had gone down, and he then spoke to my ex and said, look, I've been through a divorce, and you guys just need to move things along so that you have, fewer hostilities. But if you ever need me again, please don't hesitate to call. And he gave me his card. So then he left, and I should have immediately followed him out the door, but I didn't. I'm such an idiot. I went back to this office, and I said to my ex, how dare you lie to him? Oh, I forgot the best part. He said to the sheriff, she has anxiety. Really, don't listen to her. So I was very angry. I said, how dare you tell him something like that? It's not even true. I don't know what your game is, but it's over. You need to stop. And he just was enraged at me, even though he had done this to me in the first place, and I had to call a sheriff to my home. He said, you didn't need to call the cops. How dare you do that to me? Anyway, that's turning himself into the victim. It's very, very typical. And I just basically stomped out and went back to work. By that time, it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I was exhausted. I didn't know if I should go home at all after that, and my place was not ready for me to move into. My daughter's still living in the house. Anyway, it was another traumatic incident. So that's my experience with the civil standby. I have had another civil standby in person, and then another one on the phone where I was afraid to go back to my house, but I ran out after a confrontation and left my cell phone and my medication there. And I had to get a sheriff to speak to my ex on the phone and ask him to leave for 40 minutes so I could get my things. And he wouldn't even do that. And he was on the phone with a guy, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what they were talking about for a long time while I was at the sheriff's office at 10 at night. So anyway, civil standbys are on the record, although it's not easily publicly available. However, if you do require a restraining order or wish to obtain one, you can get an account of the civil standby, when and where it was. Furthermore, if your ex or your current partner harms you physically in any way or breaks your property, all of which happened to me, you can call 911 anytime. This is a free country, and you're entitled to the protection of the police. I will get into that at another time. I did not have any criminal charges pending on my ex, and unfortunately had not called the police in that regard to have him investigated for what he did to harm me or attempt to harm me. But other things you may want to put into your journal are what I would call veiled death threats. For example, you will die old and alone, quote unquote. I mean, I have tons of these examples. I'll get into them later as well. So this is a long video. I'll try to make it shorter, and I will get into the mechanics of the restraining order process in the next video. But just stay organized if you can, and keep some sort of record of what's happening. To recap, record only if it's legal or if you have permission to do so. When I had my 2 restraining orders, I was allowed to audio record my ex because that was one of the powers granted by the court. You can video someone. For example, if you're on a train with your kids and you're like, hey, you having a good time? Did you take that medication I gave you? Well, that would have been completely legitimate. However, I seriously doubt my ex would have burst out in rage while he knew I was filming something. But if you happen to be at your kid's soccer game, this type of thing, just feel free to video record people in public. That is, I think, legitimate. Now, do check the laws in your state. Don't just listen to me. But that's something you can do. Take pictures of any broken, destroyed property. Take pictures of injuries. Go to the hospital. Go to your doctor. So anyway, that's about all I have to say for now. I will continue soon. And thank you for listening. I hope that this is helpful in some way.